Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government and legal correspondent, and with me today is U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. Senator Johnson, welcome to the show.
Hello, Jamie. Glad to be here.
This is actually my third or fourth time, I think, interviewing you, and this goes back to 6 years ago when you were running for your second term. So let's start there. Let's refresh some of the folks' understanding. What did you do before you got into politics?
So my educational background is in accounting.
Okay.
So I was an accountant. Used to work at Jostens. I was their ring sales accountant. Then I had an opportunity to move to Wisconsin to keep the books for a new business. We were going to need a plastic extrusion for lunch and meat, and then we expanded into medical device packaging. But you start a business like that, it was a shell of a building, we got the equipment in, so you're working with the millwright, you're installing the equipment. We ran the equipment, traded 12, which oftentimes switched into 14 and 16-hour shifts, learning how to run it the first year or so before we could train operators. Then I switched into selling. So I started selling our products globally. So stuck with that business for 30 years. We sold it to a British company. I was the general manager, then I bought it back. And then 11 and a half years ago, I decided to run for the United States Senate.
So you still own it then?
No, I have no interest in it whatsoever anymore.
Oh.
We sold that out in really right before the pandemic.
All right. Well, you're here seeking a third term, and I have to start because that's where we left off the last interview when I interviewed you 6 years ago, and you said that was it. This was your last term. You weren't running for another term. So what changed?
Well, first of all, that was my intention. It was my wife's very strong intention. I didn't anticipate what was going to happen in this country. I knew I would not agree with President Biden's policies, but I was on the platform when he took his oath of office, gave his inaugural address, I think 8 times. He said his number one goal is to unify and heal this nation. He's unfortunately done the exact opposite. So, I lived through the 60s, the Vietnam War protests. We were divided then. I think we're divided more at this point in time. So I think I've accomplished a lot as a U.S. Senator. I'm pretty proud of my record. The tax cut I got for more than 20 million business tax filers allowed small business to compete with the big guys and survive the pandemic. My right to try law is saving lives. Think about that. You pass a law, you champion it. It's a law that actually saves lives. And then my JOSER project, which really, other than we use my staff, has no government involvement, is transforming lives by helping get people really good paying jobs, formerly incarcerated, drug alcohol abusers, just people really kind of at the rock bottom that want to turn their lives around. So I'm proud of that record. And in such a divided nation, I embrace President Biden's goal. We need to heal and unify this nation. I think I can be helpful. I think I can help.
Okay. So how do you plan to do that?
Well, I have a record of doing so. As chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, we passed 300 pieces of legislation, pretty much nonpartisan, by focusing on areas of agreement. I think it's a big difference between the private sector and government or politics. In the private sector, the only way you accomplish something is by finding areas of agreement. I've got a product. You want to buy it, now we'll haggle over the price. In politics, unfortunately, so often people push or exacerbate the divisions, the things you disagree on, as opposed to focus on the areas of agreement. So, that's what I've done as a U.S. Senator, to accomplish things. What do we agree on? And that's what we need to do to unify this country. Is let's concentrate on what we agree on. For example, don't we all want a safe, secure, and prosperous country? Let's start there. We share that same goal. And if you focus on those areas of agreement, the differences can be set aside or they become a little more minimal.
Okay. Well, let's talking about safe, secure country and, trying to come together on an issue. One of the issues that has divided us for at least 6 years is immigration and border security and so forth. We had I think they called them the Gang of Eight. We had some senators that were represented, both Democrats and Republicans, trying to come together, and their work was thoroughly bashed by the extremists in both parties. So how do we get that gang of 8 back together and try to solve this issue?
Well, one thing we learned with Ronald Reagan's immigration reform is you have to first secure the border. You know, when they did that amnesty, the promise was, okay, we'll grant amnesty, but we'll secure the border. When they didn't do that, the amnesty became a huge incentive for further illegal immigration, which hasn't really, it's gone up and down, but it really hasn't abated significantly. So we learned that lesson. You have to secure the border. And, you know, it's so tragic about what President Biden has done, just throwing open the border, is we were basically there. We pretty well stopped the flow of unaccompanied children, of family units exploiting our asylum laws. We did even cut the adult population, adult singles that were coming in here illegally, about in half. And then during the presidential campaign, when Democrat presidential candidates said that they were going to stop deportations and offer free health care, you start seeing the adult illegal immigrants start ramping up again. And then when Biden came into office, he canceled return to Mexico. He canceled the agreements with Central America and Mexico, threw open the border, and now it's a disaster. A story that's not being told is how awful it is for the illegal immigrants, how they are abused by the human traffickers. The border is 100% secure on the Mexican side. You do not come to this country without either paying or indebting yourself to the human traffickers, some of the most evil people on the planet. I don't want to ruin your night here by talking about the depredations. They're awful. How do you think young women pay off their debt? I'll just leave it at that. But that story's not being told. Coming to this country without proper documentation, you're not going to be able to fully participate. So we have to first secure the border, and then we can address immigration. By the way, I was working with the previous administration. We had a really good immigration proposal. We would have taken 100 visas, shrunk those, which is incredibly complex, shrunk that down to 6, award them on a metric system based on the economy, with family members, would have taken care of DACA. I mean, we would be in a really good position to have what probably needs to be a robust but controllable legal immigration system. Good for everybody, good for our economy. We need something like 2.6 million workers per year just to grow at 3%. We're not even close to that birth rate. So we need a functioning legal immigration system where it's beneficial to everybody as opposed to the illegal system that is flooding our borders, opening up the lanes for the deadly drugs. Local sheriffs, a few years ago, they had a real problem trying to shut down meth labs. Not anymore. The meth labs are out of business because of the abundance of drugs coming in from Mexico.
Would you like
now
to see some resources going into maybe reducing the backlog on the system? Can't we do both at the same time, secure the border and work on our backlog?
Let's stop increasing the backlog. I mean, you have to first secure the border. It was my Operation Safe Return. I worked on that with Kirsten Sinema. With DHS. They embraced that, and that actually morphed into the Return to Mexico policy. Slightly different, but very similar, where you have a rapid adjudication of the asylum claim. And most people that come in this country illegally do not have a valid asylum claim. It's actually a pretty high hurdle. But we've made the hurdle so low based on credible fear. You get in this country, you say, I'm afraid to go back. Okay, come on in, because you have this multi-year backlog. People may show up for immigration hearings, but not the final one. And that's when they start going to the shadows. So we need to, listen, I was chairman of Homeland Security. I've been down the border multiple times. I held probably 36 hearings on this. I understand this issue. I want a robust legal immigration system. I want to take care of the DACA kids. But it has to start with securing the border. And that's what I say what's so tragic about it. We were there.
So what's it going to take to secure the border then?
Do what we did. First of all, you need consequences. You can't throw open your borders. You can't say, come on in and you get to stay in. That's the reality. So you have to secure the border like we had done, the previous administration. Finish building the fence. I mean, do you realize it cost us more not to complete the fence than actually completing it? That's tragic. That was so unbelievably stupid and destructive. So again, it's just tragic all the way around, what happened under the Biden administration.
So other ways of bringing our country together. On what issues do you see that we have the best potential for doing that?
Well, if you take a look at the problems facing us right now,
Particularly in the next 2 years, because if you win re-election, you're going to have to work with a Democratic president, and that may change again in another 2 years.
So I'm already talking to both Senate and House colleagues. If I do win re-election, if we do get the majorities, we need to return function to Congress. And when I say function, what do I mean? I don't know the exact number, but I can count them on my hand, I would imagine, how many appropriation bills we've brought up to the floor and actually debated and passed in regular order. Mm-hmm. It's over a 12-year period now. Once again this year. And by the way, this is a bipartisan problem. This isn't, no matter who's in charge, this is what it's become. You never bring up an appropriation bill. You let the clock run out on the fiscal year. All of a sudden it's a panic. If you don't pass a CR, continuing resolution, the government shuts down. So they pass a temporary one. They time it to coincide with Christmas. Everybody wants to get out of here. So they present this multi-thousand page bill, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars, or trillion plus probably. And that's the Christmas tree. They hang all kinds of ornaments on it. It's completely dysfunctional. So this is what we need to do. We need to pass a budget.
That would be a good start.
But, we pass budgets now, but they're just to facilitate a reconciliation package.
Right.
Okay. This would be a budget to actually facilitate and guide an appropriation process. Past that, I'm looking right now, we're having budget experts take a look at what we can rescind from deficit spending that has been incurred the last 2 years, see if we can not spend it. Mm-hmm. Try and narrow that deficit as much as possible. If we can't zero it out, might be, I just don't have the numbers yet, then we have to increase the debt ceiling. Now, I don't think I've ever voted to increase the debt ceiling, but I would if you use the debt ceiling the way it's intended to be used. Attached to it fiscal controls. I have 4 bills in mind. Full faith and credit to make sure that we would never threaten to default on our debt. Preventing Government Shutdown Act. That's something as a chairman of my committee, we passed twice out of my committee, completely bipartisan bill. All that does is if you're so dysfunctional you don't have an appropriation for either the whole of government or agency, you don't shut it down. Just spend it last year's levels. That's what we do in Wisconsin. It makes perfect sense. It's never been voted on in a realistic vote because for whatever reason appropriators don't like it. Well, this is a lot more functioning than what we're doing now. Next one would be the REINS Act. It's a bill that's been around for at least a decade and just puts a higher hurdle for major regulations which hamper economic progress. Again, I'm not anti-regulation, but I'm anti-over-regulation. Mm-hmm. And then this is a bill I introduced with Mick Mulvaney in 2012, reducing the size of the federal government through Attrition Act. Don't fire anybody, just don't hire anybody, including 87,000 IRS agents. So those would be the 4 bills I'd want to attach to an increase of debt ceiling. I would vote for it then to accommodate our budget. And then, so you do the budget, let's say February, mm-hmm. Deal with the debt ceiling, and then I'd say April, so the committees have time to act. April, you start bringing up appropriation bills, and I would do them in order priority. We can discuss what that should be, but defense, I think, is mentioned 8 times in the Constitution. I'd want that one right up there. Bring it on the floor, mm-hmm. Open up to debate, open up to amendments. Hopefully, again, people have to cooperate, provide unanimous consent to actually vote on amendment bills. That hasn't been happening. We kind of lost that muscle memory. But, debate it, which we do by offering amendments, voting them up or down, and then 2 weeks, we vote on it.
Okay.
That would be such a huge step forward. And you just might, by returning to regular order, using the committee process the way it's meant to be used, you just might find more common ground. Because right now, it's just, take it or leave it. Here's 2,000 pages. You don't have time to read it, but you got to vote yes or no.
All right. Now, I've seen a lot in the flyers, as I was mentioning earlier, regarding crime, and it's become a big issue. But at the federal level, what is the federal government going to do to have the state prosecutors enforcing state crimes?
Well, so you're right. I mean, crime and punishment is primarily a state and local issue, and it should be. And should remain that way. The federal government probably shouldn't get involved much at all. There are some things the federal government can do. I mean, some best practices. We had Tim Scott be our negotiator on a package to provide proper training. That might be appropriate. The federal government's role in providing safety and security is national defense, securing the border. I mean, you have to put that at the top of your priority, because you can't have a prosperous nation. You can't have a functioning economy without safety and security, without national defense. Look at Ukraine. So that's table stakes. So on the national level, it's national defense, it's securing our border, homeland security. For the state and local, it's local law enforcement. That has to be the top priority of their budgets. And the reason the defund the police movement has been so detrimental to law enforcement and has resulted in increasing crime is it dispirits police. Talking about taking away qualified immunity. Well, if you don't want police to police at all, fail to recognize the fact that they've got a really tough job and they need qualified immunity. But what's happened, and this is called the Ferguson effect, is you start attacking the police and they back off. They don't police the way they were trained. They don't police the way they want to police. And we're starting to break that chain of, oftentimes it's kind of a family affair. Father, son or daughter follow mother or father, and it happens in the military as well. But right now, policing has been made to be such a risky profession. I mean, not only in terms of the service and sacrifice, risking your life, but risking your career, possibly risking your freedom. So I'm not talking to too many police who are recommending that their sons and daughters go into policing. I do talk to sheriffs that can't find people, where maybe you'd have 100 recruits for a couple positions. Now they're lucky to get a dozen to choose from, if even that. So I'm highly concerned that who's going to police our streets? Who's going to keep them safe? But that's mainly been driven by the whole defund police movement, the hostility toward police. And I have to say, make it political, my opponent has been a leading voice in that effort. He'll deny it. He uses the code words. He wants to reallocate over-bloated police budgets. He says it pains him to see a fully funded police budget. That is so unbelievably dispiriting to police, which is why, he could find maybe 7 police and they were retired, they would endorse him. I've got, 51 of the 72 sheriffs. I have different police associations representing about 4,500 police officers. So you can tell that not only do I support police, but I'm supported by law enforcement.
But are you supporting funding the police too? There's been multiple bills since you've been a senator where that's been put forward as federal grants.
The one they're talking about is the American Recovery Plan had something like $100 million, didn't have to be spent on police. So that's kind of canard. Again, at a national level, I'm highly supportive of national defense. I'm highly supportive of border security. I'm highly supportive of homeland security. Local law enforcement, that's a state and local function, okay? Now, part of the problem here is we're looking for the federal government to be the tax collector and then try and recycle those taxes. You think that's very efficient? It's a horribly inefficient way. Send your tax dollars to Washington, D.C., have them take an enormous cut, and then send the dollars back to the states with all kinds of strings attached. That's a really terrible and broken model.
Yeah. What about, so we talked about the crime. Inflation is another one that is on top of mind of everyone. So what would the Ron Johnson plan be for fighting inflation?
Well, dramatically reduce deficit spending and drill for oil and gas. Bring down the cost of energy, bring down the cost of gasoline. Milton Friedman is my favorite economist. He said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, and it is. So it's too many dollars chasing too few goods. So we have printed, in effect, all this massive deficit spending. We've printed dollars. They're sloshing around the economy. At the same time, this war on fossil fuel has purposefully, your viewers have to understand that this was a purposeful increase in the cost of gas and energy. Joe Biden wanted to end fossil fuel. Do you understand what a fantasy that is? 80% of America's economy is powered by fossil fuels. You can't end it without ending our economy. I'm all for an all the above energy policy or strategy, but you're not going to power a Wisconsin or Minnesota economy with solar and wind. It just won't happen. So you have to recognize that. So we should.
Or it should be all of the above.
Yes, but we have to. We are going to be a fossil fuel based, not only national economy, global economy. China's not going to give it up. India's not going to. Their own models say that if we eliminate all CO2, it wouldn't even make a full degree difference in global warming. So I've never denied climate change. I'm just not an alarmist. The world's not going to end. We have to recognize reality, and the people pushing the Green New Deal are not recognizing reality. They're harming our economy. So again, how do you fix inflation? Dramatically reduce deficit spending, lower the cost of energy, lower the cost of gasoline. And the third component really is a lot of those deficit dollars are spent on benefits that are making it possible for people to stay out of the labor force. We have a very low labor participation rate. Part of the reason we have fewer goods is because manufacturers in Wisconsin, for example, cannot fill their shifts. So we have all kinds of supply dislocations. The lead times are unbelievable. I talk to businesses, including my former business. It's unheard of lead times, partly because of a lack of labor, which goes back to our first discussion point, is an immigration system. We do need a robust legal immigration system so we have workers.
I lost my train of thought there with jumping ahead on the drilling for oil. I've read that there's thousands of permits that have been granted that aren't being filled. So why?
Because
why is that?
There's all kinds of impediments to actually utilizing those permits. On the left, the environmentalists are taking these, businesses into court. The Biden administration is trying to starve the oil and gas industry of access to capital. That's what the whole ESG movement is to a certain extent. But he's actually nominated people for key positions that literally they're dedicated to starving oil and gas industry of capital, so they can't even drill. So they may say they're permits, but having a permit is a far cry from actually being able to use that permit and get the oil and gas out of the ground.
All right. Well, and shouldn't the market, with the price of oil being up, wouldn't that stand to reason there should be increased drilling? And
well, again, if environmentalists would allow people to do it, and if there's not such hostility toward investing capital. Right now, when you've got an administration that says they want to end fossil fuel, and they have the power to end it through regulation, through taxation, through starving of capital, would you want to invest in the oil and gas business right now? Based on the prices, you would.
Yeah.
But the risk is so high, the governmental risk, the regulatory risk is so high that people are kind of backing off. They're going to, let's wait and see what happens. What's a real travesty is this administration is playing politics with our strategic petroleum reserve. That is meant for a time of national emergency. And it's being used basically to buy Democrat votes. That's a scandal.
Okay. Thinking outside our borders, on the national level, you mentioned Ukraine earlier. What's being done or what can be done to help stop that war?
Yeah, I did a lot of shuttle diplomacy between Serbia and Kosovo, decades after their war. And, talking to the people on both sides, again, decades after the war, there's not much forgetting and forgetting. And so you take a look at Ukraine, first of all, understand, nobody threatened Russia. Nobody. Not NATO, not Ukraine, nobody. That was a naked war of aggression. And Vladimir Putin is a war criminal committing atrocities and war crimes. So I do think that freedom-loving people like the U.S., and we are a phenomenal force for good in the world, we are the indispensable nation. When freedom-loving people want to defend their freedom, their children, their families, their territory. By the way, territory that we assured in the Budapest Memorandum. When they gave up their nuclear weapons, the UK, the US, and Russia assured their territorial integrity. Who's violating that? So I think we assured it. The least we can do is provide them the lethal defensive weaponry to defend themselves. Now, that being said, I want far greater accountability out of this administration in terms of how they've already spent the money. One of the reasons I voted for the first 40 billion, again, to support the courageous people of Ukraine, but I knew the commander-in-chief. I mean, he's in charge. He can pretty well put whatever military resources into Ukraine that he wants to, and he's doing that. Javelin missiles, now HIMARS, we're depleting our own inventory. So big chunk of that $40 billion went to replenish our stockpile. We need to be concerned about that in a more dangerous world. And it's more dangerous because America has been weakened by just about everything the Biden administration has done. I mean, I talked about the list of horribles, the 40-year high inflation, record gas prices, skyrocketing crime, an open border, a flood of deadly drugs, the embarrassing and dangerous defeat in Afghanistan. What do you think emboldened Putin? I don't think he would have moved under the previous administration. I don't think he would have invaded. He chose this moment, a moment of weakness in America. So that just confirms Ronald Reagan was right. You achieve peace through strength. Weakness invites war.
All right. So is there any area that we haven't touched on? I see that we're getting close to the end of our half hour, but we've touched on the immigration and the budget and the, I guess, fossil fuel versus other alternative energy sources. Do you see it necessarily as a versus, or do you think that we can do an all-inclusive approach in moving forward?
Yeah, it has to be market-based. So again, you can't force solar and wind in Wisconsin. I mean, where it makes sense. I mean, you can have some solar power, powering some little thing, but you can't power your economy in Wisconsin based on either wind or solar. You have to just recognize that reality. So you burn it cleanly. You use more natural gas. I mean, we've really dramatically brought down our CO2 emissions in the U.S. primarily because we switched from coal to natural gas. So let's not be hostile to that. And again, if you're concerned about climate change, again, I don't deny it. I'm just not an alarmist. We'll adapt. But if you are, embrace nuclear. I mean, there is some clean energy right there. And if you really look at it, there's a great book, by the way, Apocalypse Never. Recommend your viewers actually read or listen to it. It's available on audio.
Okay.
It just kind of goes through. It really does focus a little bit on nuclear, and really makes the point. We can store the nuclear waste very safely. That should not be an issue. This is environmentalists kind of scaring us away from this. Now, have we had like 3 Mile Island and Fukushima? Yes, but we've learned things from those. Mm-hmm. Fukushima, I mean, you put a great big water tank on top, just in case you lose all power and you have no ability to cool that reactor, you do that. So we've learned things. Technology advances, and that technology makes these things safer.
All right. Very good. I want to thank you for coming on the show again, and we got just a little over 2 weeks from today's date for the election. Is there any other issues, if there are any other issues we haven't touched upon, where should people check where you stand on those things?
Well, so I have wisfacts.com, which kind of refutes an awful lot of the lies and distortions that have been lodged against me during the campaign. RonJohnsForSenate.com is our main website. But again, I'd just like to point out for your viewers, I mean, there's a pretty clear choice in this election. I have a lifetime of experience raising a family, building a business, creating good-paying manufacturing jobs. I never exported a job to China. I exported plastic. Okay, I helped reduce our trade deficit. As I said, I'm pretty proud of my record. The tax cut for 20 million tax filers allowed small business to compete against the big guys and survive the pandemic. Right to try saving lives, and that stacks up against my opponent, who calls himself a forever organizer. He has little, I think, no work experience in the private sector. He's got a lot of hollow left-wing rhetoric, but in terms of accomplishments, I know he rang up about a $600,000 bill having the state patrol show from around. I drive myself around Wisconsin. So I'm just not sure what my opponent has to offer. I have a lifetime of experience, and I've got a record of real accomplishments, and I hope people take that in consideration when they go in the voting booth, and I'm asking for their vote.
All right. Ron, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our viewers for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.